Well, hello, human. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Be You Get Paid podcast. I'm your host, Amy Taylor, and I have one goal by being in your ears: to explore as many conversations and perspectives as possible on stuff we did not learn in school. You know, stuff that would have actually helped a lot more of us thrive rather than just survive as grown-ups in an often challenging and ever-changing world. As the title might suggest, this includes anything involved with knowing ourselves, understanding money, and generally anything that might offer some insight into how we can all be happier humans. With that in mind, wherever you're listening, you'll find links to some of the best resources I have personally found to help with all of those things. Sometimes I'll talk about these in a bit more detail, and I want you to know I will only ever recommend products, services, and companies that I am a customer or user of myself. Now, we're all grown-ups here, and as such, you'll possibly hear the occasional use of grown-up language. More importantly, anything discussed here is personal opinion and intended for conversational and educational purposes only, and should not be taken as financial or investment advice. That's the housekeeping done. Let's get into what I hope is some helpful chat. Welcome, Emma Zia, to the Be You Get Paid podcast. After much deliberation, we decided yesterday to introduce you as an educator and thought provoker, as well as being an energy psychologist by trade. Is that fair? Is that right? Does that feel good?
Yeah.
It doesn't do you justice. I'm sorry, it does not do you justice, but it's as much layman's terms as we could get it down to after an exchange of messages yesterday. But I am going to read the bio from your website as well, because it starts to flesh out what you do. It's when I first discovered you, it seemed very high level, and then as I went down the rabbit hole of your work, I was quite intimidated, and that's exactly why I came to your event, because I'm familiar with the leaning into, if this is terrifying, do it. So if people are still listening after that, stay tuned in, because there's just so much. Emma Zia is the founder and lead consultant of Uncaged Consulting, host of the Life Uncaged podcast, international speaker, writer, and facilitator of the In Her Wild Women's Retreat, which is where we met. An influential voice in the field of metaphysics, Emma works to normalise the education and application of energetic intelligence for people to enhance high performance, personal well-being, and connection to a deeper purpose. Her vision is to transform work environments globally into catalysts for people to actualise their true potential through a new era of workplace optimisation that prioritises energetic and emotional intelligence. Yes, please. Again, none of that really sums up everything you do, but I've certified with Gallup and do strengths coaching, which is all about, leaning into what you naturally do best. What you do is just taking that to a whole new level, because it's leaning into how we are built as human beings physically, which for so long society seems to have just ignored. So we'll start with how we met. Actually, no, let's start with your backstory and where you grew up and how you grew up, because I think for you particularly that's quite interesting and relevant. So tell us where you're from, and how you grew up, what you grew up doing, work you may have gone into before coming to where you are now. Give us a bit of that, and then we'll go back to where we met In Her Wild.
Yeah, perfect. I just have to say as well, your screen's frozen. Is that? I'm not sure.
It probably will be at your end, but it won't be when we download the recording.
Okay,
so if you can hear me, that's the most important thing.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So, yeah, my story is quite an interesting one, and it really kind of sets the premise of why I do what I do today. So, as you know, and like sharing with the audience, I was born into a family very much anchored into energetic understanding and energetic intelligence. So my granddad is an energy healer. My dad is an energy healer. My mum is a psychic. And ever since I can remember, I was in the realm of extrasensory perception. So when I was younger, I was highly psychic, very intuitive, always picking up on things, always, precognition, seeing reality before it becomes manifest, all of these things. And what was really interesting to navigate is at that time in the 90s, it was so taboo. So when I ended up going to school and things like that, it's almost like my identity split in two, because I went to school and I had to be one person and kind of present myself a certain way and not speak about certain things. And then I would go home and I could just be my full self and be all in the energy and the meditation and everything else. And so it was really, really interesting because I actually developed severe social anxiety. So throughout my school years, I was very, like, I didn't talk, which is so weird to think about, like when you hear me now, but I couldn't talk. I felt very, very insecure. I was very shy. I was that kid that would just sit there in the corner and just kind of like, my body was all curled up and didn't want to say anything. And even though that's what I was experiencing in school, I knew that there was a part of me deep down that really wanted to, or a part of me that knew that there was another version of me that existed that wasn't in that much pain, because I felt in pain on a daily basis. I didn't want to be at school. I didn't even want to be here, really. Like that's the big thing if we're kind of going like deep from the get-go. So that was like the catalyst of my journey. I listened to that voice that said that there's another version of you that exists. And I made it my commitment to always allow that voice to be the leading energy, because I knew that that voice was going to be the thing that took me out of this pain of, I felt like I couldn't be myself. And I felt like I couldn't understand myself and people couldn't understand me because of the way that my mind was plugged into, you know, the metaphysical and the energy and everything else. So I basically ended up following that voice. It took me to some really incredible places. Like when I finished high school, I moved away to college, met some amazing friends there, and I felt like I really started to come out and really be myself and express more of myself. I then went to London, started working in like music videos, TV shows, basically working in the media, which I absolutely loved. Then I went to uni, moved away for uni again. And it was just kind of like all of these moments of like a deeper self-discovery. But a really interesting turning point for me was in my third year of uni, when I was doing an assignment on social media, funnily enough, because this was like pre-social media. This was just at the beginning stages.
What is this thing? Yeah.
Yeah, which sounds so bizarre. And at that point, I was very biased. So this assignment I did was all about identity. And it was all about how having like a social media platform is the fact that you get to curate how people perceive you. And that's what the assignment was I went into all of this like deep dive into self-esteem and everything else. And like, you know, how similar to my upbringing, similar to like my childhood, where I felt my identity was split into two, people now had this social media like split into, and they could kind of curate how people saw themselves and how it affects us at an emotional and psychological level. So when I was doing that assignment, I came across this book called The 8 Pillars of Self-Esteem by Nathaniel Branden. And it was really fascinating because as I was turning the pages, it was like I was completely unraveling all of this bullshit that I've been carrying for so many years. And I was starting to actually understand why I was always so insecure and shy and socially anxious. And I was linking, you know, self-esteem with the fact that I couldn't actually be my true self at school, because my true self was like in the metaphysical and the energy, like all of those things. So that was really the turning point for me into the personal development journey. Now, my family have always been very like up there in the personal development space. Like my dad gave me one of Joe Dispenza's books when I was quite young. Like we've all been meditating for a while. They introduced me to Tony Robbins at quite a young age. So it's always been like in and around. But that was when I really came to the realization. And then from there, I just went into study and certify in energy psychology, which then later turned into like I certified in energy healing, meditation, holistic counseling, a few other things as well. And yeah, I just, in the midst of that, I also went through this huge spiritual awakening, which was really the embodiment and the experience of everything that I'd learned in theory into practice. And ever since then, it's just been an incredible, messy, beautiful, transformational journey of just keep leaning in and really just honoring those breakthrough points and those growth opportunities, and just to continue seeing like who I can be and who I really am. So yeah,
Wow. And along the way, was this your career, or were you having other jobs and day jobs along the way, and this was like a passion for you, or were you actually working, coaching and doing client work along the way?
Yeah, so as soon as I certified as an energy psychologist, I started clients straight away.
Okay.
And I did that for about a year, and it was amazing and it was incredible. But I had so much fear of not being enough, not knowing enough,
How old were you
not
when you
being
did
of
that?
value. So that would have been 6 years ago. Yeah, that would have been 6 years ago. I think it was 6 years ago. Because of COVID, the time's kind of like...
So
So
I guess why I'm asking that is because a big question I think amongst, so we'll go, I don't lose your place of thought. A big question I think for a lot of people our age who are skeptical of any work in the personal development field is age. And that's something I'll come back to about what I learned, the judgment I had around that when I came to your retreat, and the wisdom coming out of these essentially kids. It was insane.
Yeah.
So the reason I'm saying that is, like, up to that point, did you have a career or just jobs in other things? Because I don't want to ask how old you are now if you don't want to say, but you're a little bit younger than me. But, you know, it's quite young to be stepping into this world and offering to help other people. I think a lot of people have judgment around this. I certainly did. Offering to help people with this stuff when it's just so like, but what are your qualifications? Because people go mainstream, which we've learned in recent years, if nothing else, isn't always necessarily a place you can trust. That's all I'll say about
yeah,
it.
and that's really at the core of why I'm doing what I'm doing is I'm here, I'm working to make metaphysics mainstream for that reason. But going back to what you were saying, absolutely, like I was actually one of the youngest people to train in the energy psychology modality that I did. But I think because, honestly, I think like looking at the energetics of it, I think I'm probably an old soul because I feel like a lot of the perspectives and insights that I have on life and this reality and humanity is quite evolved compared to maybe other people, but it's always been that way. I've always been able to like see beyond things.
That's an understatement. But I think you make
like
it so digestible. That's what attracted me to you. Like, I could tell you were talking from this place of absolute intelligence, but you make it really digestible. So that's why I was here. But carry on, sorry.
Yeah, and I love how you say that as well, because that gives me external awareness. That is like one of my intentions, is to really make the metaphysical digestible and to really demystify things that... This is what blows my mind, is that the space that I'm in, like emotional intelligence, energetic intelligence, metaphysics, it's the things that actually like run and govern our entire human existence. Yet, because there was no education on it in school, it's like everyone's like trying to relearn how to be human and how to exist here as the personal
100%.
development space has really blown up and become normalized.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of that's why I exist, and like why my work exists, is to really demystify that for everyone, because I understand the importance of it, because it literally governs everything we do and everything we be. So without understanding, because meta means beyond, so without understanding beyond the physical, that's where you get very stuck in certain situations and circumstances. That's where you almost feel powerless to life. Because you're not actually understanding what's going on a macro level, the metaphysical level. So that's where I really come in and help people and educate people in that, so they can apply this wisdom or knowing and therefore take that power back to do what they want with their life.
And it's like I was saying to you yesterday, my discovery of you or this kind of stuff is not, to me, because I'm judging it that way, it's been my experience, is that this is so high level, it is not, I think I said to you in a message, this is not entry level stuff. But actually, it absolutely should be entry level. It should be, because emotional regulation is probably the thing that we all need to learn first in order to take on anything else, because we're so stuck in our view or stuck in... And the world is showing us that. It's why I'm doing this podcast and just trying to bring people that I've met to more people's attention, because the world is so polarized, and polarity is a topic that I love listening to you about, because it's everywhere. You know, people are so polarized on so many things, thinking they have to pick an end or a side and there's all this, like the vision I have in my head all the time is just a line with two polar, like a battery or whatever. And there's all this space in between that most of the reasonable, smart people are sitting in. but they don't want to use their voice or speak up or have an opinion or get paid and create anything online about it, because it's terrifying, because it's got to be this or this. And we're not connecting with ourselves first, which is then holding everybody back. Well, at least that's been my experience of your work. And so to go into how we met, I think it's a perfect topic to talk about first, in terms of polarity, the polarity of masculine and feminine. And In Her Wild I've talked about it on a previous episode, which will be released before this one. I went on this journey of investigating I pushed myself to do it. I wouldn't say reluctantly, because I did push myself to do it, but skeptically, for sure, around the role of the feminine, because I had, done pretty well. I'm an only child. I was raised by a single mother for the most part. I got amazing, strong women in my life. Done pretty well. Didn't really just even consider that something I needed to learn about. I was fairly comfortable in my own body, I thought. But it wasn't until I came to this, I went to a retreat in Fiji. First time I've ever put myself in an all-female environment. It was the last thing I did. It was February 2020, before the world shut down. And your event was something I went looking for. I literally Googled feminine retreat or female all-women's retreat on the Gold Coast, and you came up in Eventbrite, and that's how I found you. And then I went and looked at you on Instagram, and it was just like, it was so terrifying looking at this. I'm not going to lie. I found this event. I looked at the videos for it, and I was like, this is some 50 Shades of Grey shit. And I was so uncomfortable. And that is exactly why I then booked it. I was like, there's these women dancing in underwear. And I was like, what the hell? And I was like, do you know what? That's it. There's a reason this is happening. And I was obviously ready to go. And so anyway, shut up. I'll shut up and let you speak. But why do you feel women, and it's not just women, like there's men's retreats popping up everywhere. The Gold Coast, particularly where we both live, is full of this kind of work. But I just think it's so important. It's as important for men to be leaning into this, to the masculine stuff. It just so happens that that's how I met you, was at this feminine workshop. So tell us about In Her Wild, why it exists, and what it is about this work that you think is important.
Yeah. What an introduction. So
50 Shades of Grey shit.
Yeah.
Don't use me as your marketing consultant.
And I can see how it would feel terrifying for that reason, because it's not your typical women's retreat. And this is the thing with my work, is none of it's fucking typical, because can we swear on this podcast?
100% you can.
Okay, good.
Bit late now.
So, especially with two Brits together. So yeah, I like to do things differently. And I think that there's so many amazing like spaces for women, but I realized that there wasn't a space to allow women to be raw and unleashed and just wild, not only in like the inner expression, but also in like the outer expression. And a lot of the work that I do, because of the way that my spiritual awakening was catalyzed, a lot of the work I do really, especially in the feminine energy, exists around our sexual energy, because so many women are disconnected from not only their bodies, but also their emotional body and also their sexual energy. And if you are suppressing your sexual energy, that is the energy that you came from. That's the energy that gives life to humanity. It's the most powerful force. It's your life force energy, your chi, your prana, like whatever you want to label it as, kundalini, like whatever. So for me, I saw such an opportunity to really have that as a core focus for women to be able to come back into their bodies, come back into their pleasure bodies, come back into their sexual energy, because sexual energy isn't just about pleasure, but pleasure is like a subsector of that, because so many women are disconnected to actually surrendering into their pleasure, and it blows my mind. But it's more so like being able to cultivate your power. Like it's about reclaiming your power when you work with your sexual energy. So that's obviously a big focus of the retreat. And so that's why it seems a bit like wild and here, there, and everywhere. But really what we dive into is feminine leadership, reclaiming your feminine energy. We do feminine healing by tapping into like the mother energy, mother honoring. So as you know, like there's so much that we dive into, but the red room, which is what I call it, which is like 50 Shades style. Yeah. But you know what? I called it that before I watched 50 Shades. Like I had no idea that it was, I had no idea it was a thing. And I started calling it the red room because I love red. And then my friend was like, I'm pretty sure that's a 50 Shades of Grey thing. I was like, oh. So I watched the movie and I was like, but
and just to be clear, it's not like you walk into this retreat and it's the first thing you do. It's day 2. It's later. You're ready when you get, well, I certainly wasn't, but there's a whole spectrum of stuff that goes on before, but
it's a beautifully crafted transformation experience.
Yeah, it really is. And I don't want to go off of that just yet, but again, I was talking to previous guest Vicky, womb healing, and I don't think people realize just how disconnected from our bodies we are. And we were going in messages yesterday, and you know, it's any wonder. I'm going to go here, but not for long. I'm going to go there because I get quite triggered by this topic. It's, you know, if all the adults in society at the moment are walking around not realizing that this is so important to understand, it is any wonder that we have young children, very young children, more and more of them, confused about their gender. And this is divisive, and it gets, I have my own views on it, but you know, children that are very young now claiming that, you know, that's something they want to change about themselves, which I find quite alarming. Now, just to be clear, because it will probably trigger other people to hear me saying this, and we should be telling them they can be whatever they want. By the same token, modern medicine is fantastic and phenomenal, and I think for a small amount of people later on having the likes of surgery and transitioning and all the things might well be the right thing for them. But I don't believe that young children, I think it's as young as 12 now, can choose to medically halt their physical, biological growth. But I was thinking about it, and after doing your work and seeing it, it's like, well, any wonder they're confused, because we're all walking around not necessarily confused, but just completely unaware that we need to understand our bodies and go in. And, you know, these things and technology is just from the moment we wake up, we're just outside. So what are your thoughts on that? Because it is it's a societal thing that's come up. I don't want to dwell on it in this chat, but it dawned on me. I was like, well, any wonder they are, because we're all just not connecting with our bodies.
Absolutely. And we have to remember that the body is the representation of the unconscious mind. This is why a lot of the work I do, as you know, is identifying the metaphysical root cause of a physical ailment. Because when we are disconnected from our body, we're also not able to see the shadow stuff, like the deep stuff that's going on underneath everything, which is actually what's giving rise to certain decisions that we make about ourselves. So this is where I sit with it, is that we're definitely living in the most controversial time I think we've probably ever experienced. And I think there are so many different layers I could speak into in terms of like the gender crisis, I would say, that we're in. And exactly as you said, everyone can be whatever they decide to be. If someone wants to turn into a bird, like do what you want to do. Where I get curious is looking at the intention that's driving that decision.
Exactly.
Because as you said, if we're disconnected from our bodies and therefore disconnected from actually understanding what's going on in our lives in an unconscious level, then how do we know that our decisions are coming from an integrated place? Exactly. And when I say integrated, and I know you know this, but for those listening, integrated like essentially means like the coming together of the separated parts within yourself. So the inner conflict. For example, if Sally, who's 12 years old, says, I want to transition into now being a boy, the question is, okay, like, let's look at your relationship with your parents or your caregivers. Let's look at your relationship with your own feminine. Let's look at your relationship with your own masculine. Like starting to understand, like, do you feel like you belong? Right? Because this is another thing about a lot of this like gender transition is a lot of these things that almost, okay, there's so much I could speak into. It's almost
it's
like,
a big one.
Yeah, it's almost like what's happening right now is a subculture off of understanding and seeing that there is toxicity in our current patriarchal culture. So it's kind of like it's good in the fact that it's rebelling against the toxic patriarchy.
Yes. Something has to
in a
change,
sense.
but it's, yeah.
Yeah, but it's also like getting very clear on like this subculture, is it actually in favor of the evolution of humanity?
Is it progress?
Yeah, is it progress, or is it like the number one thing for all human beings is we want to belong. We want love, we want acceptance, we want to belong. And so it's kind of this subculture that's been birthed is like, you can now belong in this subculture if you don't belong in your current environment.
Yes.
And so sometimes people can jump onto these things, and I'm not discrediting this, but sometimes people can jump onto certain like trends, as it were, or like subcultures as a way to like actually find their belonging, because they don't belong in their current environment or in their family home or in school, which we've all experienced. Like when I shared my story at the beginning, that was a big part of me, is I felt like I didn't belong, and it was so intense that it caused a lot of emotional pain. Now at that time we didn't have all these subcultures to kind of explore with. So now with all these subcultures and with the internet and social media and like certain trends and stuff going on, there is so much diversity for people to explore that I think it becomes very easy to explore those places without questioning yourself first. Yeah. And this is what I say to everyone in everything, is we've really not learned how to question ourselves. Yeah. We've not learned how to bring curiosity to our decisions, to actually understand what's going on a deeper level before we act upon it. Yeah. So sometimes something that might feel good for our ego isn't actually good for for our soul, right? It's not good for the truth of who we are. So we have to get very curious about that. And so this is where I sit with what's happening, you know, with the transitioning and the gender fluidity and everything, is that the thing that I'm a little bit concerned about is how the narrative might being pushed or imposed upon people, rather than encouraging people to get curious and to question themselves before deciding something.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So that's kind of where I sit with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And at 12 years old, are you old enough to have been given those tools? Some kids I'm sure have. But yeah. It's just such a huge one that, you know, dawned on me based on what I was learning through your work, through other work that I've dived into with just this, you know, plenty of people go to yoga, which is all about mind-body connection, but it's just, and I think yoga's fantastic, but there's so much that I was saying with Vicky, with the womb healing conversation, was, you know, there's just so much that is stimulating our minds, which has a huge impact on our nervous system, but our bodies haven't changed for so long. There's a lot of wisdom there when you understand how to read it, which is what you're helping with. So moving on, that's a whole conversation of its own, but thank you for your input, because it's totally valid. And that's been my just observation, is like, well, if I'm walking around learning what I've learned and the world is full of people that haven't done that work, it's any wonder that kids are looking up and seeing that as an example and a little bit confused. And like you say, with access to the online world, again, you've got this polarizing opportunity to find a belonging for good or bad. There's going to be a positive or negative belonging going on, and that's what's happening. So I'm just trying to bring more voices to that conversation where that belonging is healthy. So going back to,
if you don't, sorry, I just want to interject quickly here and just elaborate. Like, this is the thing that we have to understand, is one of like the core pillars of like manipulation is to put someone in a state of confusion and then to offer them certainty. And so that's the thing that I would get really curious about, is how is certain narratives and things being pushed to confuse children who haven't fully developed the concept of self, to therefore jump on something that is more certain. Does that make sense? Like,
it absolutely
there's certain
does, because that's happening on lots of things.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so that's what the most important thing I would say for any parent that's listening or anyone out there is to focus on instilling self-esteem and emotional intelligence in your children.
Yeah.
And that's something that I grew up with, and it's something I still stand by. I was never swayed or influenced by anyone. And yes, did I get targeted for that sometimes? Because I didn't just say, oh, yes, I'll do this. Yes, I'll do it. Yeah, of course. But I stood by myself because I had the emotional intelligence to know that I have to listen to my gut and my intuition first. And so the most important thing you can do, especially with the rise of AI, automation, social media, we are going to see people that are already lost get even more lost in this extension of this virtual reality, right? It's like this reality inception. So the thing that I would say is just focus on really getting clear on your center and on your core and your self-esteem so that you can filter all decisions through your center first and not to kind of get lost in the narratives or the AI or everything else, because we're literally living in a culture of lost people. So many of us are lost. And it's because of the disconnection with the bodies. It's because of the disconnection from our soul or spirit or infinite intelligence, whatever you want to call it. And so we need to this is what's really interesting in the space that I'm in, is with the rise of AI, this is the opportunity that we also raise the awareness of emotional and energetic intelligence, because it's necessary. If you allow AI to override emotional intelligence and energetic intelligence, people are going to really be in a shitstorm. So this is why it's really important that both are rising simultaneously, which I feel over the last few years, it's really cracked open the space for that to happen. So it's quite exciting from that perspective.
Oh, what a summary. You're so right. And we'll come back to some of that when we get onto Bitcoin towards the end of the conversation. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's what this podcast is all about: freedom and happiness for human beings in a brave new world. The world is changing so fast on a technological level, which is fantastic in so many ways. And humans are responsible for that. They've created that. We have created that evolution of all these amazing things. But I said to someone the other day in a sort of a marketing consultation type call, AI is only as good as the inputs it's getting. And it's getting its inputs from humans. So if you're going to go to AI to do anything for you, be it write a blog post or write a script or whatever a lot of marketers are starting to use AI for, it's only as good as the people that are putting the inputs in to train it. And if that's a load of lost people, guess what? Your content that it gets spat out at the other end has no humanity to it, or certainly not anything of substance, because it's just going to be all people copying each other. So you're absolutely right. We've got to make sure we remember we are human, and there's incredible opportunity out there, but there are absolutely certain things that AI and technology cannot do, which is why the coaching space exists. Whatever the dream of more freedom and happiness might mean to you, be it more money, more time, flexibility of location, or simply more personal freedom to indulge those forgotten passions and long-lost creativity, starting a one-person business on the internet can be so much simpler, not to mention a whole lot of fun, than you might think. When it comes to creating happiness in this brave new modern world, my motto will always be quite simply, be you and get paid. To me, those two things are pretty key to succeeding in most areas of life. And there really has never been a better time to quite literally get paid for being you by understanding how to build income streams on the internet. I'm sure you're a lot smarter than the teenagers with zero life experience you have seen making a small fortune. But even with no experience, there's no need for any of that outdated and awkward stuff like cold calling, convincing friends and family, or endlessly posting on social media. Anyone who's ever built a business of any size will tell you one golden rule. Keep it simple, stupid. Build simple digital skills and assets that build simple income streams that for many people, and I've seen it many times, can more than replace an average salary in the space of a year or two. If working hard was the key to success, wouldn't a lot more of us already be successful? It's all about learning to work smarter long-term instead of harder. Head over to beyougetpaid.com/launch to start discovering the perfect one-person business path for you, with all the tools and training that you'll need under one roof. And if you decide to sign up to our introductory curriculum, Modern Wealthy, I'll be there to cheer you on with monthly Q&A coaching calls. That's beyougetpaid.com www.life-uncaged.com/launch. Sure, we remember we are human and there's incredible opportunity out there, but there are absolutely certain things that AI and technology cannot do, which is why the coaching space exists.
Absolutely. And this is also like the concerning piece about it is like creativity is one of the like the pillars of what makes us human as creative beings, creating our reality. And what I'm seeing is that AI is really taking over the creative space and almost giving us a jail out of free card in terms of we don't have to really apply our creativity.
Lazy.
Now. Yeah, and the only thing I would say that is concerning about that is with like as we're going through this, you know, transition into transhumanism, which transhumanism is essentially the hybrid of man and machine, is to just be very aware of how the use of machine and technologies might be taking away from what actually makes us incredible as human beings. Because if that gets taken away from us, we can be controlled very easily. We can be manipulated very easily. If we lose that sense of true, authentic, like our creative nature, we are at risk of really losing a lot. Like even like our ability to manifest, our bit, you know, and like that connection to self. So like it's just, again, it's not that it's like a bad thing. It's just like being very hyper aware of your relationship with it. Just like everything in this reality, nothing is good nor bad. It depends on your relationship with it and how you utilize that for your own growth and expansion. And so that's why I think people need to get very, like question things. Even if you're using AI and those types of technologies, question it before you use it and be like, am I getting lazy here? Is this taking something away from me? Like, is it adding to something? Like, just to kind of bring that curiosity in.
Oh, yeah. Amen. That was a really, really good segue into, I guess, the Bitcoin conversation. But prior to that, just whatever your stance is on the events of the last 3, nearly 4 years now, like, I say like a lot, whatever your stance is, there is no denying that the sheeple movement, again, whichever side you take, and you don't have to take a side, that's the point, but just so much has happened over the last couple of years where people kind of are lazy rather than actually getting off social media and thinking, hang on a minute, where do I stand on this, whatever the issue. And when you were talking about manipulation before, whether people want to acknowledge it or not, and this is why I'm passionate about Bitcoin, whether people want to acknowledge it or not, we have been controlled a little bit too easily. And if you people are just so busy, head down, just trying to live their lives, and that's absolutely fair enough. But we'll kind of start segueing on to Bitcoin and why I'm in that space and you've dipped your toe in that space, and we'll have a good conversation there. You know, it's just the creativity piece is so important, because it is that is what this podcast is titled for, you know, and what my coaching brand is titled for. It's like there is no one else that's going to deliver a message like you. There's no one else that's going to have your combination of passions or your combination of perspectives or anyway. We'll just move on to a personal story about what happened to me in her wild to tie up the metaphysical piece, because it was quite funny. And I recommend everyone go out and get a copy of this book, which I'm holding up if you're watching. But if you're not, it is called Your Body's Telling You to Love Yourself, the most complete book on metaphysical causes of illnesses and diseases. Think of it as a directory, but we're sitting in her wild. And I think I said stupid book about 4 times because Emma would check in and ask how everyone's doing. And we'd been sat cross-legged on the floor for the most part. So my logical masculine human brain is going, my knees are stiff because we've been sat on the floor cross-legged for over an hour. Of course they're stiff. Well, I can now sit cross-legged meditating for 25 minutes at a time and it's fine. So Emma said, go and pick up this book when we have a break and read what it says. And just to give you an example, and anyone who knows me might be able to understand what I'm alluding to, but there was a lot going on in my life August last year that was leading to uncertainty. I didn't know where I was going to be living. I didn't know what I was doing for work. I'm still figuring that out. A lot of us probably could sit in this space, but my knees were stiff. So Emma says, pick up the book. And it says, emotional block. Knee pain, stiffness, or inflexibility reflects inflexibility in your perception of the future. It occurs more often in those with an arrogant or stubborn personality who are unable to bend to new ideas or the ideas of others. An inflexible attitude keeps you from finding easier ways to face your future and guarantees dis-ease in going forward physically and psychologically. So I shut the book, said stupid book, and walked away because it was a bit too much like a book was calling out my shit.
Oh my God, I love that.
And then Emma said every time I had anything to contribute, Emma was like, have you checked the book? I was like, stupid book. But there was no denying by the end of those 2 days. I was like, oh my God, there's a lot to be said for this body stuff. So I've just stayed in your space and in, you know, reading about this stuff. And it just took my, what I call my woo-woo-ometer up a few notches, because this stuff is real. We have been physically and physiologically and biologically the same for hundreds of thousands of years, and our minds are amazing, our brains are amazing, creating so much, but we're forgetting about the body piece. And I think just what you do really helps people understand the connection between the two and the importance of maintaining an awareness of it. So I screenshotted some of your stories the other day on Instagram, just random screens of, you do long ones of, but they're just so digestible and relevant. So I'm just going to read one to you and just see what your thoughts are based on a few of the things we've talked about already. So here's one, which I screenshot. I said, oh, that's good. There are many people who don't fully accept themselves. This is the BU piece of what I like to talk about. So there are many people who don't accept themselves or their presence here that's worth billions. I'm paraphrasing a little bit because doesn't make sense from the previous one if it's not there. But it's just because of how they've chosen how to utilize that initial feeling of lack. Now, this, in my world, this is quite often a conversation about money. Either way, whatever we've come to experience and learn in this lifetime for our individual and therefore collective evolution will present itself regardless. But I really do think people so easily forget the most profound magic we hold as humans, the magic of choice. Choice is quite literally the path of creation. And I was like, amazing, because I'd just been listening to a podcast, a Bitcoin focused podcast with Jeff Booth, who's written a book called The Price of Tomorrow. And he's a very spiritual guy. I love the way he breaks down the connection of money in society and how Bitcoin is this parallel system that we can choose to take part in and change the way we operate in terms of money, because the current system simply isn't working. And I think it's directly responsible for why people are feeling so disembodied and lost, because they're just trying to keep up, and they never will, because it's never going to get cheaper to live. It's just going to keep getting more inflationary and expensive, and that's shutting people down. So can you just speak into manifesting what you believe when it comes to, like you say, choice? We have a choice of another system. In my world with money, it's like, just go choose Bitcoin. It's a transition, and obviously you can't just start jumping into all jump in, all in. It's a transition, but it is going to be creating the progress of humans and humanity. And talk to us about your views on manifesting and where people aren't making choices that perhaps would serve them better.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people just completely forget that our choices literally create our life experience. There are so many opportunities in your life where it's what I call a choice point. So you might experience, so there's so much I could speak into about this. Essentially, like, we live in a reality of duality. Like, we live in a reality of polarity, kind of circling back to what we spoke about at the beginning. And because that polarization that we experience allows us to understand what we do want to experience. So if you're going through a really difficult time, you feel stuck, maybe you're struggling with money, struggling with career, struggling with your partner, whatever it is, rather than dwelling in that and therefore accumulating resistance to that thing you're experiencing, recognize that you're experiencing that because it's actually giving you clarity to choose something different. Like, you actually get to choose something different. If you're struggling with money, you don't have to stay in that place. You get to look at, okay, how can I choose to be a different person? That money therefore makes sense to be a vibrational match for me. So this is where we speak about energetics, and I'm not sure where everyone listening is kind of at in their understanding of this, but essentially I see this universe as a vibrational universe. So I really subscribe to the realm of quantum physics and everything that exists there. So if we live in a vibrational universe and therefore everything is energy, everything is vibrating at a certain frequency, when we like rest in that knowing and rest in the awareness of that, we actually really take our power back to make different choices that therefore make us a different vibrational match to an alternative reality, to something different from where we are right now. So I think like, especially with the rise of like cryptocurrency and things like that, that decentralization is really giving people more choice, but also it's uncertain and people don't like to move into uncertain territory. So there's a lot of people kicking themselves that they didn't get on the bandwagon earlier because of obviously like the financial gain that's come through, you know, cryptocurrency. But it's still such a new space in a lot of terms. Like it's still so much in its infancy that people are still feeling safer in the system, even if the system doesn't support the rise of their expression in this lifetime. So I really see money and expression is linked. Like money and sex are really the two things that make the world go round, right? Sex is the procreation and money gives rise to experience. It gives opportunity to experience. And so if someone's really struggling with money, that usually indicates to me that on some level, they're actually not fully claiming their space here. They're not fully living and they're not fully allowing their expression to come through. Now, that being said, you can also see this in different contexts. Like there are people I know, like friends of mine that are very, very successful financially, and they still hold that undercurrent of I'm not good enough, or they hold the undercurrent of I'm a burden on people's lives. So it's not that you can't be financially successful, like carrying those things. It's just that you're still not going to feel fully fulfilled, if that makes sense. Because it's almost like a lot of people that carry like inadequacy, or as I said, the themes of being a burden or something like that, or the themes of not feeling like worthy of a place here, of existing in this reality. That can actually really give fuel for you to create financial security. But then maybe your relationships, like you can't actually develop deep connection with people because you're still holding the undercurrent of I'm not good enough and I'm a burden. So you might be really wealthy and rich and successful, but how deep are your relationships? Because really what we want is connection. When we connect to other people, we actually connect to ourselves deeper. When we connect with other people and go to deeper levels of intimacy in our relationships, it cracks us open to knowing and understanding and seeing ourselves more, which naturally gives rise to more opportunity for our own life experience. So relationships are always our biggest teachers. So it can kind of manifest like that, or you can hold that frequency of inadequacy, not being enough, or being a burden, and actually limit yourself. It's almost like that you're living in restriction constantly. It's kind of like there's like you're pinching your life force energy is what I call it, right? It's kind of like you're holding on to the money that you do have, and you don't want to invest in Bitcoin. You don't want to do that because you're like, oh, like, but it's actually coming from a place of not allowing your full expression and life force to flow to you and through you. So you're not living life fully. And that's why your finances are always feeling restrictive, and you're always like looking at your bank account as this is the money that I have. And it's like, that's just an illusion. Like, that's not the truth. Like, wealth and abundance is available everywhere. So to look at your bank account and think that that's the only thing that's available to you, and therefore when money leaves your bank account, you feel that contraction in your body, that's actually you living in illusion. And so it's about opening up and like really breaking through those illusions and opening up to a whole different realm of relating with money. I can't remember your original question, but that's just where I went with that one.
Amazing. You've just touched on so many crossover points as well, because the practical person or the logical person who's still up here, which was me for so long, and the first thing you talked about in this conversation was the splitting of identity. And I think as much as yours was between being this kid at school and at home because of who your family were, and they were very much in this space of metaphysics and energetics, I think anyone can relate to being a different person at school versus at home, or at work versus at home. That is the fundamental problem we're talking about, is people just not knowing themselves, being themselves.
Absolutely.
And when I go back into my head and what I know about Bitcoin is that it's the solution to a system so there's the mindset piece, and you can live in abundance, and it's why certain people are successful, or why certain people will go on a path, make a load of money and be unfulfilled because they've not got the other piece, which is probably something to do with connecting to their sexual energy, or, you know, the stuff we were talking about at the beginning. Then there's the other piece, which is they're so connected to themselves, they've done nothing else, but there's still something going on with their understanding that you just described both, which is where Be You Get Paid came from. It's like, as long as you understand those two pieces, which are two massive topics in themselves, the crossover and where Bitcoin brought it all together for me was that we're living in a world of humans that is physical, and the current system that everyone is subscribing to, it is stopping that, because all people do is struggle, and they don't necessarily know why. But it's been going on for hundreds of years. Our great-grandparents, our grandparents, our parents, and now us have paid exponentially more for everything, but yet it's not changing. And so this is what, and so I think the reason people are so restricted and contracted in their bodies around money is because it isn't enough. It's not enough. So there is crossover between the reality of what needs to change, and we're getting there. And there's this new parallel system now that people are slowly starting to wake up to. But it's a movement, right? There's going to be a tipping point.
Now, I am here to preach the why of Bitcoin. But if you're anything like me or any other human being, chances are you probably want to cut to the chase of how to buy some. Am I right? Well, you're in luck, my friend, because I have done that legwork for you with the Amber app. I have been a customer of this app for well over a year now, and it has enabled me to put my Bitcoin buying and saving on complete autopilot. So when they reached out to partner up with this podcast, it was a no-brainer for me. There really aren't many places I would trust these days for buying my Bitcoin, but Amber is one of them, partly as they are a Bitcoin-only platform, but also because they have fun and automated features like Buy the Shift and Stack Like a Sailor, which will make a lot of sense if you're hanging out on Twitter and know what the expert investors are doing without having to spend hours of your life learning how to do it too. Head over to beyougetpaid.com/Amber or set up your account using BU Get Paid to get $10 in free Bitcoin when you sign up.
There's this new parallel system now that people are slowly starting to wake up to, but it's a movement, right? There's going to be a tipping point. And just because those who are early adopters of it, who believe it, you know, that doesn't mean that we're loaded, and it's just a belief at this point. We're taking massive risk. You know, there are people that did it sooner, but human emotion means that those who got in really early and made tons of money probably sold. But the point that I'm trying to spread more, or the education I'm trying to spread around Bitcoin, is that it's so much bigger than just making. If you're looking at it, how can I make more dollars or euros or pounds or whatever, you're still measuring it from within the same system we're in. You're not talking about getting into a new progress. So what's your journey been with it? Because you said that you've got some, and we were talking yesterday, and you said, "Oh, I don't know that I can speak into it as an expert." But what did you mean by that? What is your understanding of it? Why did you buy some?
I have it. So I invested in my first coin maybe like 4 years ago.
Yep.
So I was kind of a bit late to the game. But the first coin that I invested in...
You're early, trust me.
It feels that way, though.
Yeah.
It feels that way.
In your world,
a lot of my
probably.
friends...
Yeah,
a lot of my friends were into it like way before then. And so the first coin I invested in wasn't necessarily a great experience, because I think it ended up, I don't know if the coin went down, whatever, but so basically all of the money that I made. No, it wasn't Bitcoin. Yeah, so all of the money that I made, which was a lot, I then couldn't get it out. So I was like, okay, cool. So that was my first experience. So naturally I'm a bit like, oh, but I think the main thing when it comes to crypto is like understanding it. Like at the beginning, I was like, what is this? What is this? Like, you know, there's understanding money, and then there's understanding this decentralized, like, so I was like, wow, like, how do I understand this? So what I did was I started to get into conversations so I could really understand it. People that were already in the space and everything like that. So I started to just educate myself through speaking to people about it, joining groups, watching YouTube videos, things like that. And I then eventually invested in like Bitcoin, ETH, and like some of the other coins as well. The way that I kind of roll with it is I haven't like bought any recently, which I probably should, because I know it's like, yeah. But I just when I was really investing in it, I was also really opening myself up to the realization of, and I don't know if you want to go there, but I'll mention it and we'll see, that it really does come down to like that sovereignty piece. And when I was really like learning about crypto and Bitcoin and everything else, I was also learning about, can I say this? I don't know. I think so. I was learning about how, you know, if you have a birth certificate, you're actually owned by the system.
Wow.
If you have a name, you are owned by the system. You are a number in the system. And so I went through the process of like learning about what would happen to be fully out the system, which is to have no name. And what that would look like, what that would feel like, because that's when you're really completely decentralized.
Wow.
And it's kind of like weighing up the pros and cons of, because as much as we can like rebel against the system and say, you know, that XYZ, insert your thing, it's also like, it's really on the precipice of, wow, like if I'm fully out the system and fully decentralized, it also comes with a lot of things that I'm not going to get because I'm technically not part of society.
Exactly.
And so it's really recognizing, and it's kind of like, I think the most important thing is to like have your feet in both.
Yeah.
So that you have that like space of, it's almost like protection, like you, but it's also like, it's protection, but it's also like uncertain and a risk at the same time. So it sounds, you know, contradicting, but it's kind of like what I would say to anyone listening is just like really educate yourself on everything, because when you actually see the truth of everything, it's really fucking like, it opens you up to a whole new world of, wow, like if I have a name and a birth certificate, I'm actually not in ownership of my identity. I'm actually owned by a system that therefore has control over certain things that I say, do, and be. So it's kind of sitting in that space of desiring the sovereignty, wanting the freedom and everything else, and also still existing in society and having one foot in there. So it's a really interesting space to play around in. And I know that was kind of a tangent.
No, it's great.
But
it's brilliant.
Yeah, that was my experience as I was opening up to it, is to really understand the importance of decentralization for that reason.
Yeah. It's brilliant because being a human in society does require, in my opinion, so that there's a lot of Bitcoiners who will say we don't need any government. I personally am grateful to live in a country where we have a government that gives us, you know, we have a civilization, we have protection, we have, you know, a military, police, things that keep us safe. Some full-blown, I think it's libertarians, will argue that, but if we don't have any of that, humans organise themselves. And yes, that is true. It's how we got here.
Yeah.
And humans will continue to organise themselves. We're just going through one of these transitions where we're reorganising ourselves and the institutions that we trust. And money, perfect segue to the next question then. So to you, what is money as someone who does exist in the system, in a system that we currently call society? In Australia.
Sounds horrible when you say it like that, isn't it? As someone in the system.
Well, we are. But the thing is, it's what you were saying about I'm owned. It only go if the last 3-4 years hasn't taught anybody anything about questioning how much ownership the system and the institutions and structures and borders of countries does have over us. If you're not even starting to challenge that, whatever side you're on, I just think a lot of people are starting to go, well, hang on, but people are looking for something to belong to again with that question, rather than just thinking, well, where's my comfort zone with it? You have a choice. Going back to what we were saying before, you have a choice. Here it is. Here's the solution. It's up to you how much you want to put your feet in it. So, what is money to you? Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I'll answer that question in a second. I just want to touch on what you said about belonging, because this has obviously come up a couple of times. For anyone listening, like really, I would say like bring so much awareness and curiosity to the decisions that you make. Is it coming from a place of belonging? Because that's where you go into separate sides. Like to actually take a side, I understand like being polarized, because it actually gives rise to new perspectives and insights and things like that and understandings. But to take a side on something is therefore to condemn the other, To take a side on something is to also reject the other, and that actually moves us further away from the evolution of the collective consciousness. So be very discerning of like, am I choosing a side because I feel that there's actually a sense of belonging there? And how can I actually like witness and like understand all the sides, but actually just come back to the belonging of myself? Because if I belong to myself, I belong wherever I go. And that is actually like the ultimate version of self-esteem. Anyway.
And do what's
Just
best
had
for
to say
you.
that.
But no, but you're absolutely right, because there's definitely, you know, I've found my tribe in the Bitcoin community, and I've had to keep coming back to that as well, purely on a financial level. Like, what is actually best for me? Because this might well be the new system and the new reality for our monetary standard, and that's fantastic. But do I just martyr myself to it because I belong to this tribe that believes in this future? Well, and I've been close. And it's that awareness that's kept me from financially wrecking myself. So it's so relevant to your own financial situation in the current reality that is money. But what is money to you when someone asks the question, what is money?
I would say that money, I've never been asked this before, so we'll see what comes out. I would say that money is a tool to experience our creative capacity.
I love that. That's all you need to say.
Yeah,
and it is so in line with what we've just been talking about with Bitcoin when it comes to proof of work. You know, that whole the Bitcoin technology as a money is built on that, you know, whereas we are currently living in a society that consumes before it produces, debt before anyone works.
Yeah. And I think this is the thing, is that like people have to understand that you are in a relationship with money. Like that's just the fact. Whether you want to be or not, you are in a relationship with money, because money is the main tool as well as sex that really makes the world go round. So you can either continue resisting it, you continue not educating yourself on it, you can continue rejecting it, complaining about it, being in lack with it, or you can actually be like, you know what, it's not going anywhere. So let me actually reinvent how I relate to it. Because you've got to think of money in terms of like, just as if you were in an intimate relationship, and it's like, imagine that you and money were in an intimate relationship. Would you be happy with that? Like, would you want to spend that much? Do you know what I mean? Like when you look at your intimate partner, you wouldn't want to like sit in a room with your partner all day, every day, if you fucking were just rejecting them all the time and had such a bad, like negative vibe with it. So it's like, it's not going anywhere. So it's a case of you choosing to re-educate yourself on what money actually is from an energetic space and from a physical space, and really starting to love it. Like one thing I do with clients when it comes to money is we do love language work. Because sometimes we completely forget that, like money, like allow money to love you how you want to be loved, right? So like if you look at the 5 love languages, like notice how you love to be loved and notice how you want to be loved by money. So like, for example, if you love physical touch and that's one of your main love languages, how do you desire money to love you through physical touch? Is it through the beautiful clothes that you wear and how it feels? Is it through like holding luxury things like in your home and like feeling the velvet and like feeling the designers and, you know, everything like that? Or if it's words of affirmation, how can money love you through words of affirmation? How can you actually speak about money like openly and confidently and with love, like rather than saying, oh, I don't have money for that, or whatever it is? How can you actually change your communication? Because if words of affirmation is actually one of your core love languages and is one of the core ways of how you relate to people, then play with that in your relationship with money and speak about it from a place of love. Like you wouldn't want your partner to consistently say, you're a shit person, like you're not enough for me, you're not enough for me, you're not enough for me. So why are you communicating about money in that way? Why are you allowing that to be a narrative that you continually play in your head? Because that's actually self-punishment. You can't have that level of self-talk with money and then complain about the lack of it, or complain about wanting more but not knowing how to get it, right? So I would say, like, look at the love languages and start to play with that. And another thing that I do with clients is I open them up to, it's what I call vibrational interpretation. So it's opening up to where wealth and abundance already exists in other areas without thinking it just has to come through that one way. And this really kind of ties into that Bitcoin space, is like a lot of people are still programmed in that outdated time for money exchange. And it when you open up to the fact that wealth is everywhere, wealth is the chair that I'm sitting on, wealth is the house that I'm living in, like wealth is the cafe that I go into when I see the exchange of money and I get the coffee, and like wealth is everywhere. And the more you open up and generalize your ability to interpret wealth and abundance as it exists everywhere, like inside and around you, you actually start to open up to money coming to you in miraculous ways that you could not previously anticipate. Like, this is one thing with me, is I've had money, especially last year. There was so many circumstances where money came in a way that I could not anticipate. It wasn't directly through my business, it was through another avenue. And I could not have known that it was going to happen that way. But I was open to the wealth and abundance being everywhere and all around me, and just like really enjoying the deliciousness of that, that I was able to interpret that vibration, and therefore I was open to receiving money in that way. Right? So you've got to remember that money is like energy, money is a tool, money is a frequency, and money is also the physical manifestation of the exchange of experience. It's like money literally allows you to express yourself. That's why like in society, like there are certain things that we see as valuable, you know, like having a lot of money, fame, recognition, status, title, big home, things like that. And it's just because that's the way our society has structured what we perceive to be a value. But what you've really got to like look into is, what does money mean for me? And like, how can I tune into that frequency before it becomes manifest? And obviously that's like the most, you know, simple thing in the book, in the textbook. But it's really about not seeing it as those measuring sticks of the fame, the recognition, the big house,
the belonging,
and seeing it more as the feeling state that it puts you in, because the feeling state it will put you in is probably a feeling state of freedom, and that freedom gives rise and allows you to be your full expression in this lifetime. And that's what I believe our purpose is. I believe that our collective purpose as humanity is to contribute to the evolution of humanity. But how we individually choose to do that and express that and reveal that to the world is through our individual expression. As you were saying before, the whole like, you know, premise of be you, get paid, is that there is no one walking this planet out of the 8 billion people that currently exist that has the same DNA as you, the same life experience as you. Like, you have been divinely orchestrated with your name, your birthday, your family, your upbringing, your life experiences, your genetic gifts, talents, and blessings. You've been divinely orchestrated that way so that your divine purpose here can be expressed through that. That's almost like your blueprint, your individual blueprint. And so I truly believe that each of our individual purpose here is to be our fullest expression. And we're so limited in that because we're still subscribing to, I have to present myself a certain way, I have to be a certain way, I have to be in the system so I can be accepted and I can feel belonged, you know, and everything like this. And it's like, well, tune into like actually what makes you happy, actually what gives you that sense of freedom, because that is how you're going to align with that financial abundance, is when you actually fucking finally decide that you're going to do two things. You're going to connect with who you truly are, and you're going to explore and create who you desire to become. And when you have those two things as your main focus and your leading energy for this life, you give purpose to this life, you give meaning to this life. And when you do that, that's when you feel fulfillment. That's when you feel freedom. That's when you feel happiness, is when you have meaning for life and purpose for life. It actually, like, it's so crazy. I think I was reading somewhere the other day that like they did this study of what actually makes people happy, and it's purpose, it's meaning. It's not any of these measuring sticks. So focus on that. Focus on giving meaning and purpose to your life and being your fullest expression, and leaning into all those spaces and places and conversations and opportunities that allow you to step into more of your fullest expression. And that's why my women's retreat exists, is to create a portal that catalyzes women into their expression. And that's why it's called In Her Wild, because it's about rewilding you to your most authentic self so you can feel confident in the expression of that. That's actually what's going to make you happy. So focus on that and that frequency, and actually like set that intention to be gifted with the opportunities, the relationships, the circumstances, the people, and everything that helps you break through the illusions that's holding you back from that, so that you can actually continue to step into that self-expression. And that's when you become an energetic match for money. Like, money wants to flow to you. Money is always supporting you, but money's supporting you when you support yourself through choosing to actually discover your purpose and to be on purpose and to live on purpose and to put meaning to your life experience. When you do that, money bravely supports you.
Oh, just let her go. Just let her go. That's what I said we were doing when we got into this conversation. I'm just going to ask you a question, and then you just rip. And she did. She just ripped. It's great. I love it.
How we roll.
But you've literally just articulated, first of all, everything I'm here for, and the message of this podcast and this brand, but also the absolute number one reason our monetary system needs to change to support that. Because yes, money is an energy of support. It funds our basic needs. And I'm actually going to shout out my sister-in-law here, because we were having a conversation during COVID where, you know, I was objecting to the Canadian trucker lockdowns and people getting frozen from their bank accounts for supporting that. And she made a comment, and she was absolutely right. And we were disagreeing. And I was like, well, money makes the world go round. She's like, no, people make the world go round. And it was, I was like, that's right. But that's actually where we're agreeing, because people do make the world go round, but people at the moment ain't going to show up if they ain't getting paid. And the system we're locked into currently, that is the structure for that, is unfair, and it is being controlled, and it is centralized, and it's never going to deliver more people doing what you're talking about, because they've always got it in their heads. They've always got to be striving for more and more and more. And some will, which is what puts them up in that wealth bracket. But the fundamental foundation of what we're working with isn't allowing more people to feel they can just do what they love, because it won't pay enough. Because, you know, because 10 years from now, 20 years from now, everybody knows houses are going to cost 10 times more or whatever. And that's the mentality we're stuck in. And it's fair, because that is the system we're working with. But when that parallel system starts getting more widely adopted, and it's not going to happen overnight, it's just having the bravery to start dipping a toe into it, as you have, which is why all I would say to you in terms of continuing to learn about it is Bitcoin, not crypto. Because there are projects and technology developments out there that some of these cryptocurrency projects are valid, and I think they're trying to do good things, but they don't need a token. And the world is changing so quickly, and they are tech investments and tech speculations, but the only one that is truly decentralized and functions as money and has all the characteristics of money is Bitcoin. So that's what I would say. So let's wrap this up. Awesome. I'm so glad I asked you that question, whatever the question was.
Yeah, who knows?
There's a lot of amazing sound bites there. I just hope I can clip them short enough, because she ripped. It was amazing. So last question that I always ask everybody is advice you would give. This could be another podcast in itself with you, I'm sure. Advice you would give your younger self on being you and getting paid. So what advice would you give to your younger self on just being you? And what advice would you give to your younger self about money?
That's such a good question. The first thing that comes to mind is... Wait, can you ask the question again? Because I think my answer might be...
What advice would you give your younger self about being you, or knowing yourself, being you?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is go and do it quicker.
Wow.
Like, it took me... Yeah, it took me so fucking long. The amount, like... I resisted going into the coaching space and being an energy psychologist for so long. Like, after my certification and I went straight into it, I then took a break from it, had my spiritual awakening, actually became the embodiment of all the work. But then I resisted it for so long. And it's like, why? Like, why did I hold back from getting paid for who I am for so fucking long? So I would say to people, honestly, what the fuck are you waiting for? Go out there and do it. Everything that's going to come up in the process of you going out there and being you and getting paid for your purpose and what you want to do, everything that comes up in the process of that is only going to expand you. It's only going to expand you. The failure, the trial and error, the fears that are going to come up, the self-doubt that's going to come up, the insecurities that are going to come up. It's actually a fast track to your evolution. So lean in, like, go do it. Don't hold back, and know that everything that comes up, you can fucking hold it. Like, you can hold it. And if you're feeling that desire to step out and to do something, whether it's a passion project or a business or whatever it is, if you're feeling that desire, know that you're feeling that desire because it's meant for you to experience. It's meant for you to actualize. Otherwise, you would not be feeling it. And that desire is never going to go away. That desire is never going to go away. So you can either continue resisting it and therefore accumulating all of this resistance in your day-to-day life, or you can actually lean in and be like, okay, how would this look? How would this feel? And even if I don't know exactly the step-by-step process, because you can't predetermine how it's going to work out, you just have to take the leap and you figure it out as you fucking go. Do you know how many times I've spoken to like super successful entrepreneurs, and it's given me so much relief, because even the people that you think have got their shit together,
I don't know what
none of us know what the fuck we're doing.
No, they've just taken one step that led to another step into the clouds.
Yes, because it's an ever evolving process, and taking the first step is the hardest step in a lot of ways. But once you do that, you just have to fucking trust, and you lean in and you lean in and you keep saying yes and you keep saying yes and you keep saying yes to that calling, that desire, and it will unfold. Like when I look at where I am now, and to be doing this work full time, running a business, transforming people's lives, I'm like, I could not tell you how I got here. I could not tell you how I got here. I could tell you little things that I went through, but you will wonder how you got there until you get there, and you'll look back and you'll be like, I couldn't even tell you. All I did was trusted the next step. So I would say a really powerful question to ask yourself if you're in that place is ask yourself, what can I do now? Not what do I need to do? What should I do? How do I get from A to Z? Ask yourself, what can I do now? And take that first step, trust it, lean in, and the next step will be revealed. It takes a lot of trust and surrender. It will be the most amazing, incredible thing you'll ever do, because the places it takes you through, the way that you overcome challenges and obstacles, it is rewarding to the point that it cannot be articulated through the human language. Like, you will reach places of euphoria that you're like, oh my God, the person I've become through this process, just simply through saying yes to answering the calling and to answering that burning desire, is something I could not have anticipated, and I cannot even put it into words. But fuck, I'm happy I said yes, and I'm happy I took that first step. So that's what I would say.
Yep. And to me, amen. And I mean, God, we should be charging for this podcast. I feel like I got a free therapy session, and I said that on a previous episode with someone. I'm like, starting a business, even if it fails, it will. The first one you do probably will. The first thing you do will probably fail. But it's therapy. Yeah. It's like the cheapest therapy, and then it becomes profitable therapy. Just because it brings up your shit, because you're handing over responsibility. You're taking the responsibility that you've given away to someone else to pay you. Yeah. It doesn't mean you have to quit your job. And so many people just won't even put a post up on social media about their opinion on something because of the boss might see it. And it's like, just chill out. Like the control thing, we've all just retreated, and, you don't even have to get paid for your thing. This BU get paid doesn't all have to exist as was it Ikigai, where it all crosses over. That's the goal. But for plenty of people, having a side hustle that they adore that makes them $500 a month to pay for their holidays is life changing. So it's just ticking both boxes.
Yeah, and this is the way that I see it, which has really like expanded me as I've gone throughout building my business, is your work is your life and your life is your work. There is no work-life balance. That's complete bullshit. It's a complete bullshit thing that people have brought into like companies and corporate organizations, saying, oh, like work-life balance. No, like
money's been made in it.
Yeah, but you spend most of your time working. Like anything that's money related is actually like life related. It's not just work. Oh shit! Oh, there's someone at the door. It scared the shit out of me. So it's
you need to get it.
Yeah, maybe I will. I think it's probably a delivery. Is that all right?
Of course, I can cut the delay out, but you're on the roll. Shall I sing and fill the space? No, I'll just edit it.
Sorry, little delivery. I'm
As
back.
if we were going to be an hour or less. Okay. Work-life balance you were talking about.
Oh, yeah.
It's
I
bullshit.
honestly think that will be one of the best things that expands you and completely changes your perception of your work. Because think about how many hours that you spend working. That's your life, right? And so if you're not happy in your work and you want to start something new or like whatever, it's your life and your work is the same. So like, it's also about like who you choose to be when you show up to work. Right? This was something like circling it back to what I said at the beginning. Who I was in high school caused so much internal pain and internal suffering because of who I chose to be was to hide myself and dull myself down. Who I actually am is an extremely vibrant, bubbly, loud, like presence.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing, is like, who are you choosing to be at work? And maybe that's the reason you're unhappy. Maybe it's not the work. Maybe it's actually who you're choosing to present yourself to be. Like, get curious with it and play with it, but know that your work is your life and your life is your work. There is no work-life balance. And so it is all one and the same. It does all cross over. And so see how you can really play with that a little bit more and audit your life and be like, okay, so what do I want to change in my life and bring into my life and adjust in my life and tweak in my life so that I actually feel more fulfilled in all areas.
I've said so many times, yeah, you're right, because I've said so many times when I first started learning digital skills and affiliate marketing, and the first things I did to just make some money with the intention of eventually being able to have that sustain me full time, which was about 2.5 years later. But when I left my job, I actually wasn't that. I now look back on it and wonder how much more successful my business would have been if I'd stayed in my job, because the more you do, the more you can do. I was lit up. I was excited. I was enjoying my work more. I was appreciating having colleagues and a team every day. I was a different human being when I left. I don't regret leaving, but it's not the work at the moment. It's you. So be you, get paid, just start working on both. Just throw yourself into those topics. As always, that's what Emma was here for among all my guests. There's just, because it touches everything and everything touches it. So it's just, I'll never get bored of having this conversation. Thank you so much.
Beautifully put,
Tell us and tell people where, I will link it obviously, but tell people where to find you.
Yeah, so I mainly hang out on Instagram, but everything, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, it's all under the handle at Emma Zia, which is ZIA with 2 underscores at the end. And there you can or emmazia.com as well as my website, so you can find me through there. They're the main places.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I feel like that was a free coaching session. You are welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for taking the time to tune in to this podcast. I really appreciate it. If you found it helpful or useful, or even if you just feel a tiny, tiny bit better for having listened, there's a couple of things you can do that would take a few seconds that I'd really appreciate you taking the time to do. First thing you can do is subscribe wherever you're listening. If that's on a podcast platform, it's usually just pressing the plus sign next to the main show listing page. If you're on YouTube, you can subscribe to the channel or give us a like on the video. If you're feeling really generous, you can leave us a comment or a review. That's either on YouTube or the podcast platforms once again. If you feel like anyone else in your life might benefit from any of the topics that you hear us talking about, feel free to send them an episode. And lastly, feel free to give me feedback, comments, suggestions, or personal reviews and thoughts and feelings on social media. And tag me so I can thank you. It's at Amy Taylor Says on Instagram or Twitter, or send me an email on amy@bugetpaid.com. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to keep being you, keep getting paid, but most importantly, just be happy. Oh, and by the way, if you didn't enjoy it, don't do any of those things. You just go have a nice day. Save your time. Thanks.